Hello and welcome to Channels Book Club. I am Olakunle Kasumo. We are absolutely delighted by the many positive feedback on our recently held Meet the Authors Forum, which we are serializing on this show. The feedback tells us that many Nigerians are eager to learn more about Nigerian history. Today, we'll show you the third part of the series, and much of the focus is on two men who shaped Nigeria in many ways. The colonial era history of Nigeria can never be complete without these men. I'm referring to Frederick Lugard, who spearheaded the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorate of Nigeria in 1914, and Walter Egerton, who was a governor of Lagos Colony and of Southern Nigeria. So, who really were these men? Were they heroes or villains? In the three books reviewed at the Meet the Authors Forum, Frederick Lugard was certainly not described as a hero. We therefore wanted to hear from the authors. Enjoy this. Let's talk about Lugard very briefly. I'll start with you, Mr.
Well, yeah, I think the misfortune that we've had is that he lived for a very long time. So he had ample opportunity to revise his own role in history, of colonial history. He died in 1946, which gave him, I think, just a little over 80 years on Earth. So he started to reinvent himself. He's often referred to in Nigerian parlance as Lord Lugard. He wasn't he wasn't a lord when he had anything to do with Nigeria. He wasn't given that peerage until 1928, when he became the first Baron of Abidjan. So when I read Nigerian history and they say Lord Lugard at the amalgamation, it was Sir Frederick or Captain Lugard at best at some point. And so you see that, you might think it's trivial, but it flavors every single thing that he did with Nigeria. The whole purpose of indirect rule, he didn't invent it, but he claimed it as if he was the only person who thought of the idea. Even the whole concept of amalgamating Nigeria wasn't his idea. He was just an executioner who was sent here to come and finish the idea that had been started 30 years before by the Niger Committee, led by Lord Salisbury. So, you know, the thing about him is that he was a murderous, anti-people, racist segregationist. People do not realize that in his manual on what to do with Nigeria, he developed a racial segregation residential policy, and he documented how to build a town along racially segregated lines. And so the whole concept of a government-reserved area was part of the segregated living that was designed for Europeans. That the Europeans would live on the higher ground, and there would be a strip of civic buildings that would separate them from the lower ground where the natives would live. And so you get, even if you excuse people in history for being men of their own era, and you don't prescribe modern day morality with people out of context, and that's what you need to do in history sometimes. Not to be indulgent or to be overly forgiving, but you take people in their context. Even in the context of Victorian or Edwardian colonial thinking, he was exceptionally evil. So when the history books say that he took Kanu, or the British sent an expedition to Kanu, what they omit to say is that they killed 5,000 people. All right? Or when they say, "Oh, we went to Sokoto and I told the Caliph that he needed to accept British authority," there were over 10,000 people who were killed in the massacre in Sokoto. You understand? So this is the measure of the man. He despised Lagos and he despised Southerners because this education gave them the ability to oppose his thinking. And the reason why the Egbas succeeded for so long was because it was the only part of the southern Nigeria that was amenable to indirect rule. So he didn't need to take them down because all he used was the Alake. There was no equivalent in the east, and there certainly wasn't an equivalent in the Lagos area or anywhere else that they could use in the same way that the Alake was used for. So the indirect rule was this very same thing that people talked about, of a collaborator. You had this headman who was the emir, inevitably, who was a serious collaborator with a vested economic interest in the enterprise called colonialization. And incidentally, just a minute, just a minute. You must also, he was determined not to industrialize Nigeria. He was determined not, that's his legacy. His legacy was to undereducate the North and to ensure that there was no industrial development in Nigeria. He was confronted with the evidence of commercial quantities of oil. And in 1912, he was told deliberately, he was told that John Bergheim was the head of the Nigerian Bitumen Corporation, and that the Nigerian Bitumen Corporation was going to take on the task of barrelizing this oil for sale. And he rejected it because he knew he was destined to become the governor of the United, he had been told at that time he was going to be the governor by Viscount Harcourt, that he was going to be the governor general of the country. So he ditched it. The loss for Nigeria became what is now called, what then became the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which is the precursor of British Petroleum. So that was Nigeria's loss, or gain, depending on how you want to look at it. Sorry.
Yes, Shukwa, thanks for that introduction. I'm going to just supplement it with a reading. I was desperately looking for the passage on Lugard, because this guy was he originated 419 in this country. And I said it in the book. Here's the extract. The French had first encountered Lugard in East Africa. There, whilst in the service of the Imperial British East Africa Company, he had been appointed to lead an expedition to check French territorial advances. The tactics adopted by this gunslinger led to a full-scale religious war between British Protestants, French Catholics, and Muslims as missionaries killed missionaries for the right to save the souls of the Ugandans. By the time these emissaries of Christ had slaughtered themselves in full view of the natives, not only were the Ugandans justly skeptical of the merits of this new God, but Lugard's name was like the Antichrist in French circles. Whilst his arraignment on charges of inhumanity and warmongering in Uganda served to kill off his original aspiration of writing his name on a map of East Africa, his experience in taming the French was precisely what Goldie's company was looking for. It was on the strength of this peculiar curriculum vitae that the Royal Niger Company chose Lugard to lead an expedition into Borgu in 1894. His assignment was to obtain treaties from the local chiefs for use in fending off French encroachments upon the River Niger. His tactics were again controversial. Here's the passage. At the town of Niki, which was later to become the focus of British and French claims to Borgu, Lugard was unable even to secure a meeting with the African king. Instead, he obtained the signatures of a local imam, or holy man, and two of the king's councillors, one of whom was the head butcher, to a pre-printed formula treaty. He nevertheless wrote in the document that it had been made between the king of Niki, which is the capital of Borgu, and the Royal Niger Company. The Arabic signature of the imam was described on the treaty as, quote, signature of native ruler. Lugard also inserted a name for the king in the treaty, which was later shown to be the name of a king who had been dead for 6 years.
Okay.
We must bear in mind that the House of Assembly in Kogi State is called Lugard House. And the official residence of the governor of Kaduna is called Lugard Hall. So, you know, you need to know where you stand in history. The Confederacy flag, General Lee? What do you do with such people in your history? What do you do with them?
Okay.
You can't erase them, but do you edify them? Sorry.
No. But why do both of you, Mr. Ogun, Mr. Shashore, why do you disagree on Egerton? Walter?
Yes.
Egerton.
Yes.
He didn't come out so well in your book. You seem to think that he was, you've spoken well of Egerton. Why do you disagree?
Like I said, my history is an observer sport. When I'm confronted with historical facts, I record them. Egerton used government resources to build churches. He knew it was illegal, but he did it deliberately in an attempt to ensure that he stamped out native worship of their own nature. He built a road in Lagos today called Broad Street as a street that was particularly broad in order to serve as a break between the native residents and the European quarter on the marina. He did so on the belief, knowing fully well that he should have known it was false, because by that time science had already developed, on the belief that the mosquito carried this evil disease called malaria. But it carried it because the bearers of malaria were black people, particularly young black people, and that mosquitoes could not fly or live for longer than 40 yards. So he ensured that Broad Street was double the length, double the width. He documented it. Didn't make this up. So this is the kind
That's
of
the history of the name, Broad Street.
Yes.
Interesting. Just in case, Egerton was governor of Lagos Colony.
Governor of Lagos Colony, and then they deliberately appointed him governor of the Southern Protectorate in order to do the first amalgamation, which they had already planned for 1906. So the amalgamation of Nigeria was a two-step process. The first was in April of 1906, when they amalgamated the Lagos Colony with the Southern Protectorate to create Southern Nigeria. And they chose him, they handpicked him deliberately. Sir Ralph Moore was his predecessor, and they felt Moore was a bit too, he was ill and a bit lazy, and they wanted somebody else.
When you're looking at the record of these colonial officers, as I was looking at them, Egerton had a redeeming feature. I saw him as development orientated. He really was, and he was the governor of Southern Nigeria at this point. He really was pressing the buttons. And those before him had been doing so also, but he took it a level higher. He was governor in Malaysia previously. And I always get confused as to whether we gave Malaysia rubber or they gave us rubber or the oil palm, but he took some of those seedlings over here in order to develop the economy. That is what we wanted. That is what Nigerians want. That is what Nigerians want. Those who would build a capacity, the McGregors who created the canals, who built the canals. Yes, there would have been a commercial objective as well, but at least they were doing something beyond the extractive. So when you have a toss-up between Lugard and Egerton, and this was the choice, and it brings you to your issue now of the amalgamation. It was a choice as to which of those two, Lugard or Egerton, would be the first governor of the amalgamated Nigeria. And the choice was Lugard. And the rest is history.